Hey there, Grace. We are in the plenary hall where vote counting is underway for the vote counting abroad. And that began at 5 p.m. And now the website where you can actually see the votes has now become active. People have been trying to access it the last few days and there was nothing on there. They couldn't reach the website. Now those numbers should start to appear very slowly, including places like Spain. Um, let's see, it's about 7 p.m. now, so in about an hour, we'll start seeing some private exit polls being published online in the big Bolivian media here. And of course, those are non-binding; those have no influence on the actual final result at all. But they will begin to come out, and people might begin to get a little bit excited about the numbers they see. And there are already some fake ones coming out now.
Camila, earlier I saw your colleague Oli Vargas, he would have posted that there would have been some sort of ruckus in certain areas when he went to vote. What has happened? Can you tell us about any such incidents?
Yeah, I was at both of those by chance because I didn't go with him, but we were covering similar things. I was at both of the two locations where those things happened. So the first one was this morning when we went to go cover Luis Arce voting, and it was just overwhelmingly pro Luis Arce, pro Mass. There were Lucho chants. People were just loving him. The media was loving him. I'm sure there's no other candidate who is received in that way. And also, there were a lot of voters at that polling station, which was a school. Um, but what happened was that after he actually left and was able to get into his vehicle, there were still dozens of press teams there and a lot of supporters, including people who weren't even in line to vote. And that is a middle to upper middle class area, which is not necessarily the neighborhood in favor of the movement towards socialism. So what happened was some neighbors were shouting down from their windows, or some people came out, and when they heard that there were so many pro-mass chants, and they began to, a little bit of a conflict ensued there. The other case was in Satellite, again, an upper class area where the Mas Senate president, the president of the Senate, is Eva Copa. She is the highest ranked government official in the movement towards socialism currently. Of course, she would be in line for the presidency if anything were to happen. She went to go cast her vote, and that area is, although El Alto, the city, is very much in favor of her, that upper class area is not. They do prefer the right wing candidates, and she made the mistake of announcing earlier in the day at a prior event that she would be casting her vote at that place and that time. And so a lot of people were awaiting her. So on the one hand, there were chants saying Eva, 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 and there were other people chanting fuera, fuera, as in get out. So there was a little bit of a scuffle, including media, and some of the right-wing opponents of Bacopa actually attacked media, including some of the people at Radio Concession Coca, like Ollie, as you mentioned.
Now, as you spoke about, media being attacked in that one incident, prior to these elections, I know that it was a tricky situation for journalists on the ground who would have been reporting the truth about what was taking place in Bolivia. Now you're mentioning that right-wing media are in the country right now and they're operating, they have large camera teams and so forth. I mean, has there been any real threat to media practitioners being able to practice their craft, or is it something that you're seeing as they're sort of allowing journalists to function at this particular point in time because there are so many people who might be sort of painting this regime in a positive light?
Yeah, I think that some of the remarks that the de facto administration has made publicly on television, at press conferences, has really gotten them in trouble. They've really been called out by all sorts of people in the international community. And because of that, I think it's offered us, at least temporarily, some sort of shield of safety. And of course, some of the international observers, they've tried to expel from the country or not allowed to come in. And it just seems that actually making a big deal about the freedom of expression, freedom of press, and fair elections and the right for the Bolivian people to have transparent elections, which are observed by international organizations has made a difference. And so I think that I haven't felt too unsafe, but particularly today, as I haven't before, because of course I was here during the coup. But there is something to be said about the fact that if you're walking down the street, there is military and police everywhere. The ratio is unbelievable, and that they are more heavily armed than ever because this regime has purchased just multitudes more in non-military weapons since January.
Yeah, and I mean, earlier I was speaking to political analyst Fernando Casado, and he was speaking about how this de facto administration would have done terribly at managing Bolivia's environment, especially as it relates to wildfires. And as I mentioned with him earlier, there would have been at least 120 serious fires since August. I mean, have you heard anything on the ground about people's concerns as it relates to the environment and agriculture and how this de facto regime is handling those issues?
Yeah, I would say that working class Bolivians, some indigenous people are very concerned, but there isn't the type of concern that we heard last year when there were similar fires that spilled over from Brazil. Those fires were covered by the mainstream and the international media who came down and covered the fires with the drone, taking images. At this point, we don't even have the images that we would need to be able to report with very good visuals because those agencies aren't here covering the fires. Those NGOs haven't traveled here to cover the fires. People aren't demanding that the regime step out of office because of the fires, because of course those were agents, pro-coup agents, who were making all the fuss about the fires last year. And this administration has divested from the public. They don't want to spend money on social programs. They don't want to spend money on they don't want to protect the environment, and all sorts of other initiatives that became the norm under Evo Morales are now going to go away. It would be going away, has gone away since this de facto administration took office. So it's a little bit ironic that the country is literally burning down, and we haven't seen a lot of news about it.
I mean, simple farmers in Bolivia have been under threat. When the coup took place in November 2019, the military would have opened fire on protesters who were against the coup regime, taking control of the country, of course, by force. I mean, what is taking place now? Because, for example, when you look at what takes place in Colombia with former FARC combatants being killed with impunity, and we haven't really heard anything about anyone being brought to justice for killing these protesters, what is taking place as it relates to that issue?
With regards to the two massacres, and there was also some violence apart from that, committed by security forces against working class anti-coup protesters, there has not been significant gains on that. There are some, Bolivian human rights organizations, local organizations, which have been fighting for and with these victims associations. And what they have been able to accomplish is that some of the people who are survivors of the massacres, for example, people who were shot by the police and military, have been able to receive some medical care. There were a lot of people who were shot and they just stayed in their homes, in their communities, because the local hospital couldn't take enough people in, or people weren't even being accepted in for medical help because everyone was just so afraid. There was just so much uncertainty about what was going on. I mean, people were literally getting shot from helicopters. So and the medical staff were afraid to speak out. They're afraid to say whether they thought that the ammunition belonged to security forces of the state. But what hasn't happened, and what people are continuing to demand, is reparations in other forms, which is for the families, for example, the wives of the victims. All the victims, and Sankata and Sankaba, were all men, and many of them were married with children, and they've been demanding help for those families. And some of the people who are survivors, of course, wouldn't be able to work because of their grave injuries. So there is a long ways to go. Also, the legislature here has held hearings. There is a commission for justice for the victims of Senkata, and it turns out that Arturo Murillo, the interior minister of the de facto regime, and others who were called to speak or testify did not show up. So I don't know how that can advance.
Thank you so much, Camille.